Welcome to You've Got This with Sarah Hamaker, a podcast to encourage and equip moms along their parenting journey. Join Sarah each week as she interviews dads and moms like you and discusses the joys, challenges, and rewards of raising kids.
Hi, and welcome to this week's You've Got This. I'm your host, Sarah Hamaker, and I'm glad you joined me. Today I want to talk a little bit about Halloween. Should Christians ignore or embrace Halloween? Now, I'm probably not going to solve this question for you. I just want to give some thoughts from a Christian perspective about this. Now, as most of my listeners know, I have 4 kids and we celebrate Halloween. And by that, I mean we carve a pumpkin, we give out candy, and we go around the neighborhood dressed up in costumes. And the reason we do this is because I realized years ago when our kids were little and we first had moved into our neighborhood, we had lived in a condo before where nobody went trick-or-treating because it was mostly young adults. And I realized as we're sitting there in our neighborhood that we had just moved in with our daughter, who was just a baby at the time or just 1 year old, that this was the time when strangers in our neighborhood, neighbors who we hadn't met, are coming up to our house and knocking on our door and saying trick or treat. Not just the kids, the parents are there too. And we looked at each other and we said, what a wonderful opportunity to meet our neighbors. Now, we don't embrace the dark part of it. Our kids are not allowed to dress up as zombies or witches or goblins. We want to have a more positive, presentation with costumes. But it has proven through the decade or more that we've lived in this house, in this neighborhood, a great way to meet our neighbors. And some of them we've invited over other times, or at least we've been able to smile and wave at them and kind of put a face to a name during the year. And we found that it has been a wonderful way for us to really connect with our neighbors. And it's been kind of fun too. I feel like we're, a little bit of a Christian witness, even in the midst of all the darkness. Like one year, one of my daughters dressed as Mary, Mother of Jesus. And, she had the, kind of traditional, headscarf on, the thing on, and the baby. And she's going around. Of course, people ask her who she is, and she'll just say Mary. And so it's kind of funny how many blank stares she got. And she's like, and they're like, Mary. And then, she would say the Mother of Jesus. And then people were like, oh, okay. So it was just kind of interesting for them to realize, our kids to realize that not everyone believes in Jesus. And also a little bit of a witness for that. So that's kind of how we do it. But to talk about Halloween, let's talk a little bit about the Christian roots. It used to be that way back when the early church actually started what we called Halloween. The name refers to All Hallows Eve, which is the evening before the All Saints' Day of remembering early Christian martyrs. During the 8th century, Pope Gregory III moved All Saints' Day from the spring to November 1st to coincide with the pagan festival of Samhain in an effort to sanitize the revelry, which often degenerated into drunkenness and mischievousness. Now, of course, that sounds like Halloween to most of us here. But All Hallows Eve was a feast to commemorate the martyrdom of the saints, and had already been celebrated by Christians for many centuries prior to this time. And Halloween kind of came to America with immigrants from the British Isles during the latter part of the 19th centuries. American youth found Halloween very attractive. Hollywood has added the fun with a wide assortment of fictional characters, demons, monsters, vampires, werewolves, mummies, and psychopaths. That certainly hasn't improving the American mind, but is making someone a lot of money, as one person had told me when I was talking to him about this Halloween. But that doesn't mean that we have to allow Halloween to become that. For children, the allure of the holiday has been trick or treating, right? The dressing up in costumes and receiving of candy. And here I'm going to give you a couple of ways to kind of reorient your children in their thinking to be more Christ-centered in the midst of Halloween. Halloween can be an expression of our faith life. We think it's worth celebrating. So talk about those early Christian martyrs with your kids. Talk about how the word Halloween came from, All Hallows Eve, Halloween. Let's talk about how we can be a genuine witness for Christ, a light in the dark world. Instead of focusing on the negative aspects of Halloween, we can turn it into a fun, positive relationship building tradition. So I do encourage you, my listeners, to follow your conscience. If you feel you should not celebrate Halloween, don't celebrate Halloween. If you feel you want to celebrate it at your church, trunk or treating or something like that, do that. If you feel like it's okay for your kids to dress up and go around your neighborhood and knock on your neighbor's doors, do that. Just remember that just because someone else does or doesn't celebrate Halloween doesn't mean that they don't love Christ. Let's keep the focus there. Let's remember that God has given us all different areas in which I think He's giving us some leeway to use our conscience, to be a light in the world in the way that He wants us to shine. Maybe that light is not handing out candy for Halloween, but maybe it is. So try to find a personal, positive way to use it. We can see our culture as a mission field, and we can use Halloween to talk about how the whole world is held captive to the fear of death, for example. It's in all the literatures and movies, especially around Halloween. People are afraid of death, and rightly so, because the other end of death is standing before a holy God. What a great entry point all this death imagery is to talk about the gospel. And as someone else I had interviewed for an article on Halloween said, I love this season. It's the only time of year that neighbors come knocking on our door. What a wonderful opportunity to make our home a place of hospitality. So just remember, you can meet your neighbors, you can have fun on Halloween, and you can use it as a way to point the way to Christ by your costumes, by the way you interact with people, and just by the way that you have your family decide to or not to do Halloween. But just remember, telling people that they can't go trick-or-treating maybe isn't the way to help them to see who Christ is. Maybe you can just explain a little bit why you prefer to do something else, or maybe the history of All Hallows Eve, or maybe that, you don't want your children to dress up as demons and vampires and things like that, and why that is. We don't have to surrender our beautiful faith heritage by eschewing Halloween celebrations. This holiday gives us an opportunity to show Christ to our neighbors and our friends. I've always found it striking that Halloween is followed by the International Day of Prayer, and we can make it a season to remember the early church martyrs and pray for those who are still suffering for their faith around the world today. And that's kind of my Halloween talk. But I also want to talk about zombies and vampires and ghosts. Oh my. And how to help our kids navigate the scary side of Halloween, because my children were very sensitive, and some of them still are, even though they don't really want to admit it since they're older now, to, to scary things around Halloween time. I could never do haunted houses as a child. I still don't want to watch horror movies. Those things, I don't like them. They scare me, and I'm an old woman, sort of, kind of. I'm a middle-aged woman who's not afraid to admit I'm scared of those things. Pop culture has become saturated with this darkness, and we need to kind of help our children navigate that, to help them not be scared of these visions, these haunted houses, the imagery. And so I want to close the rest of this podcast on kind of the Halloween theme, on some things to consider when broaching the subject of zombies and vampires, ghosts, and other creepy, crawly, and scary things. We should take the lead. The Christian parents shouldn't avoid talking to our children about the dark stuff. It's essential that we as parents see the great need to be the voice in our child's life, to tell them that the images and dark themes are not normal, no matter how many TV channels are making stars of the undead. If parents are silent, the void is filled with whatever voice or channel or YouTube star is speaking the loudest. Focus on the light. The best place to start is with God and what His Word has to say about following Jesus. An obsession to seek the darkness is a judgment from God's perspective of those who refuse the light. Understanding Jesus, his goodness, righteousness, and holiness is the real issue. To focus only on the darkness and its dangers and risks is to still miss the light. God did not warn us with scare tactics to follow him, so we need to follow his example and not use fear to scare our children away from the scary stuff. Our kids need to hear the truth from someone who knows the source of truth, and truth, like love, casts out fear. Reinforce that evil is real. Sometimes, if we only mention that Halloween depictions of wizards and ghosts are not real, we forget to talk about how there is a very real evil being inhabiting our world, Satan. We should explain to our kids how the devil and evil are real and what sin is. We can use Bible readings to do that. We can also, there's also some, I think, probably good literature books to talk about that. For older kids, I highly recommend the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. A couple years ago, my teenage girls and I read that together as a summer reading program, kind of a summer reading project. And that was really good because it helped them to see, yes, Satan is real. His demons are real. And they are not going to want our good. Be creative with the Halloween holiday. Think about how your family can take what the world has corrupted and instead participate in a life-giving way. So maybe you trick-or-treat in costumes that glorify God's creation. Maybe you dress in Bible characters. Maybe you dress in characters from literature. Uplifting instead of darkness. Know your family. This might seem obvious, but as adults, we forget that sometimes what seems harmless to us can be very scary for kids. And some kids, like I said earlier, like to be scared while others don't. Be mindful of that and don't hesitate to make your child wait a little longer till they get a little older before they read books that are scary, watch movies or shows that might be scary. It's okay for them to wait, but once you read or see something, you can't really unread or unsee it. Take careful to shield your young children from the scarier side of Halloween. Make sure that they're not scared as much as possible. Make it a heart issue. If your child seems to be drawn to dark things this time of year, ask him or her why, and take the time to remind the child about how we're to live every day. If whatever they choose to embrace on October 31st is not acceptable to embrace the other 364 days with your whole heart and a clear conscience before the Lord, then that probably settles the issue, right? So help them to see that it's a heart issue if all they really love and want to do are the dark things. Take a stand. Sometimes our position at Halloween can be at odds with our neighbors, family, or friends, but we should strive to find a balance between not violating our conscience and extending grace to others. The tough thing is to explain the seriousness of our stance against dark forces and evil being glorified in your family's costumes and activities, and not condemn the many people who find darkness and scary things fun for Halloween, which will likely include friends of your child. With black in abundance and scary images and costumes the norm, Halloween can appear dark without any light. We can let the darkness continue to creep over our neighborhoods, or we can seize the opportunity to shine the light where it's needed most on October 31st. I hope that you decide to shine the light this Halloween. And I would love to hear in the comments to this blog, this podcast, how you choose to celebrate Halloween. How do you shine the light of Christ to your neighborhood? So I hope that you do take Christ out of your home and into your neighborhood, whether it's through your church's efforts, whether it's you walking around, whether it's handing out candy, whether it's just helping your kids choose positive costumes. Let's take Christ to our neighbors this Halloween. You've been listening to You've Got This. I'm your host, Sarah Hammerker, and I'm glad you joined me. I'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast of You've Got This with Sarah Hammerker. Sign up to receive notification of new podcasts and listen to previous editions at sarahhammerker.com. Until next time, remember, parenting might be hard sometimes, but don't worry, you've got this.